Gonna get started in just a minute here. Waiting for all of the channels to get on board. All right. I think we're good to go. Hello, welcome back. I'm Jim LaPierre. This is Sober Now. Today, doing lots of cool things. Talking about coaching and whether or not it's something that could be helpful to you. I'm going to be encouraging folks to write in your questions and comments. You can do that on Sober Now's Facebook page. If you haven't already liked that, head on over and give it a quick like and receive some notifications there and all of our live streams. Broadcasting on Choose Help's Facebook page today and several other outlets as well. So, talking about coaching, we got to break this down a little bit. Coaching is a very diverse occupation and service. I think the best way to describe it concisely would be that it is a mix of counseling and mentorship. It's oftentimes a product of a person's professional experience and sometimes their lived experience. So if I was going to compare it to anything, I would say it is very similar to counseling. And I want to just break this down a little bit. So when we talk about services for substance use disorder or mental health or trauma recovery, it's a little bit of an alphabet soup, and there's oftentimes a lot of confusion because we use words interchangeably, words like counseling and therapy. Trying to figure out which professionals do which is a little bit confusing. So the big difference between counseling and therapy is that counseling is usually focused from today forward. Therapy is looking at how the past continues to have an impact on the present, and with different credentials, we find different levels of experience and training and education. And one of my favorite things about coaching is that there are no regulations, no restrictions. Anybody who wants to declare themselves a coach can. A lot of coaches are professionals that are doing side work or have reached a point in their career like I have where they're exploring a lot of different avenues other than what their profession traditionally practices. So we're going to talk about the upsides and the downsides, but again, would love to get your questions, would like to get your experience. My first thought is because of everything that we've been experiencing in the pandemic, the rise in need for services has been exponentially growing. And so if you are even considering that maybe you need some professional support with a substance use disorder, with mental health, with anything of that nature, get yourself on a wait list now. Unfortunately, the demand has surpassed any supply that has ever been available nationally. And so the need is greater than it's ever been. I've been working as a mental health therapist and addictions counselor for 18 years. I've been coaching for 11. Just like most of the cool things in my life, I backdoored my way into coaching. It's not something that I ever really intended to do. I do life coaching. I do recovery coaching. I have done a lot of professional mentorship in terms of helping other folks that are in my line of work. And all of those are variations of coaching. So I guess before we go any further, I'll explain the origins of coaching. Coaching actually started in the 1970s, and it originated in folks referring to themselves and offering themselves for hire as fitness coaches. And so maybe you need some help developing an exercise regime, and I mean, I'm sure that's true for some people. For most, in my experience, if you're hiring a fitness coach, it's because you need accountability. It's because you're like me, and left to your own devices, you are never, ever, ever going to show up to a gym with any regularity. And so having a coach means that not only do you have the intention of improving your health, but also have a professional or someone that's highly trained that you have an appointment with them. And my experience, especially with those close to me, is that increases the chances of follow through about 10,000%. So fitness coaches became people who diversified and got some training, got some education, and maybe they learned a lot about nutrition, maybe they learned a lot about different types of supplements and ways to improve our health. And this became kind of an organic thing where folks, I think, realized pretty early on that maybe they were being paid for their expertise, but what they were really being paid for was to hold folks accountable for their own goals and to actively support them in reaching them. In a lot of cases, coaches became confidants. They became folks that we confided in, that we looked to for support in achieving our personal goals. So that's the origin of coaching. It has since evolved tremendously. So we have life coaches, recovery coaches, business coaches, executive coaches. For just about any major life or professional need, you can find coaches who provide that service. And some of them are people like me that have a day job as a therapist or have some type of professional expertise, and some of them are folks who just have lived experience and make their expertise available for hire. So some of the upsides about coaching, it's totally flexible. There's no regulation, there's no restriction. So you can meet where you like, when you like, as often as you like. You can meet in person, over the phone, online. All of those things are options. You're not limited to having to go to a professional's office. It's very efficient. There's potentially no commute. There's the opportunity to meet in a public setting. There's the opportunity to meet for longer or shorter periods of time. And traditional professional appointments tend to, of course, be highly structured and restricted, and there's a whole lot of things that a professional can and can't do as determined by state and federal regulations, as determined by insurance companies and managed care. There's a whole lot of factors here. So what I love most about coaching is that it removes all of those restrictions and allows you to work together with someone to establish a mutual process and create what's going to work best for you. The only real big downside to coaching is that insurance doesn't cover it. So we are paying out of pocket for coaching services. I always encourage folks to do their homework. Like I said, anybody who declares themselves a coach wants to, can, and in some cases, I've certainly met coaches that I don't think have a lot to offer or who perhaps should not be working in the field. But I've also met a lot of really stellar individuals who have a great deal to offer and do deserve to be paid fairly for their time and expertise. When I say do your homework, I guess I should flesh that out a little bit. The first thing is research the person that you might be working with and determine, what's their background, what kind of training and education do they have, what kind of life experience do they have. Look beyond their personal website, right? So anybody can set up a site and tell you how wonderful they are, but look around, see if you can find some reviews, see if you can find what they've published on other sites. And then the next piece is do a lot of homework on yourself. And this is one of the many ways in which coaching can be really beneficial. You have to know what your goals are. You have to know what are the biggest struggles in your path. I shouldn't say that you have to. I should say that it behooves you. The more we know about what we need, the more likely we are to receive it. And if you can share with a coach, here's where I'm at in my life, here's where I'm struggling, and here's where I want to be in the future, I think that can be invaluable. I've seen it work for an awful lot of people. I appreciate that coaching tends to have a present and future focus, meaning we're not going to spend a lot of time exploring the past. We don't have to go anywhere that you don't care to go. It's very different than what traditional treatment has been. Traditional treatment tends to be very slow, time cumbersome. It tends to be very limited. So, for example, the 50-minute hour once a week is the norm for counseling and for therapy. And again, coaching just offers a lot more flexibility. So I'm going to pause and check in real quick, see what kind of questions we got so far. Adam, thank you. Does coaching need a degree or a license? No, it does not. Again, anybody who would like to be a coach can, and that's very, I appreciate the fact that it honors lived experience. So, if you do your homework, what you'll find is that some of us are highly educated, highly trained, and some of us maybe have a mix of training, education, and personal lived experience. So, for me, working as a coach in life coaching has been, and in recovery coaching actually, has been really valuable when I've worked with professionals who cannot afford the possibility of a diagnosis, the possibility of a breach of their anonymity or confidentiality. For a lot of us, particularly if we work in healthcare, if we work in law enforcement, as a first responder, in the military, potentially we endanger our careers by acknowledging the presence of a substance use disorder, the presence of PTSD, surviving trauma, acknowledging that we live with significant levels of depression. All of these things potentially put our careers in peril. And so a very high percentage of the folks that I have served as a coach are folks who simply weren't comfortable taking any amount of risk with the possibility that their employer or that their, especially when they work for the government, that it would be discovered that they have one of those diagnoses. So that's, again, one of the best parts about coaching. There is no diagnosis. There is no paperwork. There is no trail that your employer or your your divorcing partner or anybody else could ever locate about you. And again, coaching can be done in any medium you like. So I've actually worked with folks in the past who, for example, have a security clearance with the Department of Defense, and the possibility that it would be discovered that they were getting some type of therapeutic service would endanger their career. And so some of those folks I've worked with by phone, some by video conferencing, and actually, interestingly, a high percentage of folks with that type of need that I've been a coach to, I've actually done it 100% through email. The idea of attending an in-person session was something that, for whatever reason, was undesirable to do. I also appreciate that coaching has made it possible for me to work with people all over the world. So typically a professional, especially in the United States, can only work with folks who, we have to be licensed in your state in order to work with you. Even if we're meeting over the internet, even if you're coming to us, we can only serve as your therapist or your counselor if we're licensed in your state. So coaching, again, removes those restrictions, and it removes a lot of those barriers. It's really funny to me. Most of the best things in my life today are not things that I consciously chose to do. They're things that my higher power put in my path, and coaching is a great example of that. So back in 2010, 2011, I connected with some pretty amazing individuals who run a site known as ChooseHelp.com. I really appreciate ChooseHelp, and I point towards it as an excellent resource for things pertaining to substance use disorder, because they're very pragmatic. They don't really want to talk about theory or feelings or things of an abstract nature. They want to just get right down to what's the problem, what's the solution, how do I do this? And so I just happened to catch a few of their articles about 10 years ago. I connected with the guys running the site and said, hey, I write on topics of recovery. If you want to have something submitted, if you want to work together, that would be cool. And they took me up on the offer. And that led to them presenting me as an expert. which is nice. I don't typically refer to myself as such, but I do have a lot of expertise in mental health and substance use disorder. So, long story short, by virtue of presenting me as an expert and by writing articles that people found helpful for various aspects of recovering from substance use disorder, I ended up getting emails from people saying, hey, are you available for hire? Because I've read some of your stuff and found it to be really helpful. And it's so amazing to me looking back at this. In retrospect, I shot down an incredible number of requests to hire me. And I can tell you that the reason I did that was because it wasn't my idea, it wasn't my plan, and it was outside of my comfort zone. And so I found myself saying no a lot to people who just sought me out because they appreciated my writing. So I noticed that at some point, and I took a step back, and the recovery skill that I'm thinking of right now is taking pause. If we can just give ourselves a little bit of time, step back, process the experience with folks who have some objectivity, folks who have support for us, then we can explore, okay, am I being self-limiting? Am I getting in my own way? Is this really how I want to behave? And I realized, of course it wasn't. I was turning down a lot of opportunities that had been placed in my path. So when I started saying yes to requests to consult and to do coaching services, I ended up working with people all over the world. And folks that I never would have met personally or professionally became people that I was available to serve. And so I ended up working with a lot of folks on the west coast of the US, a lot of folks in Western Europe, and I even got to work with folks in Western Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and it's a bit of a comedy of errors to schedule time together across like 6 or 8 time zones. But what I really appreciated was that I always got a chance to connect to some really cool people who had some ambition and they were ready and willing to do some work, and those are my favorite kind of people to work with. And getting to learn so much about folks in different cultures and different countries and how recovery in various forms is viewed within their culture, and kind of adjusting and enriching the work that I do accordingly. So I've very much enjoyed that. That expanded for me. I started working with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are amazing people. They're like me. They not only want to establish a product and a brand and a company and do really cool things, what they're really trying to do is establish a lifestyle and a way of being that brings them joy, brings them satisfaction and fulfillment. The many difficulties of being an entrepreneur, one of the biggest ones is that typically you're in business for yourself, which means that you don't necessarily have a boss or a funding source or somebody who holds you accountable for your own goals. So who do you call when you really killed it this week and everything was awesome? And who do you answer to when you just kind of mailed it in this week and didn't get very good results? Again, this is one more thing that I ended up doing because my higher power put it right about here, and I couldn't mistake it. So I was very fortunate. I've worked with a lot of brilliant people who just really needed that accountability. They needed to be challenged, and they needed to have a lot of support in fractionating. Fractionating is a term that only a therapist would use, but what it means is take something big and break it down into small pieces so that it becomes manageable, so that it becomes something that lends itself to a course of action. As long as what we're looking at is overwhelming or huge, we're not likely to make much progress on it. Adam, thank you. How does one become a coach? Various means. If you're interested in recovery coaching, I highly recommend checking out the CCAR model, the Connecticut Community Addiction Recovery model. is a pretty fantastic way of giving a person very basic counseling skills and very basic case management skills so that we can help people in early recovery navigate systems, get basic life needs fulfillment is really the biggest emphasis of the CCAR model, and that's why I appreciate it and encourage folks to get trained in it. It's a 40-hour certification to begin with, and then of course the sky's the limit as far as where you go from there. Locally, recovery community centers sometimes will pay for that training for folks who are willing to volunteer. That's certainly the case for me locally. The Bangor Area Recovery Network is a pretty great resource that helps folks get that type of training, and you can become a huge asset to your community. If you have expertise in any particular area, you can start coaching as a side job or as potentially as your new career. It's important that people be able to find you. Almost all of the work that I've done in coaching is a product of having written articles for a lot of different sites. It's a product of doing a lot of public speaking and teaching in my local communities. And so I think what's most important is that people need to be able to find you. Increasingly, if you have an interest in coaching, the opportunities are probably better than they've ever been, because the folks that we've turned to for traditional treatment, by and large, aren't available right now. Because of COVID, because of so much socio and political unrest, I keep saying it, but the demand for services has risen dramatically. We've seen about a 30% increase in overdose deaths during this time of pandemic. We've seen a massive rise in the levels of anxiety and depression that folks live with. We've seen an increase in domestic violence. We've seen increases in intimate partner violence. A whole lot of stress and fear in our country right now. And so if you find that you can't access a counselor or a therapist in a timely fashion, coaching could be a great alternative. And by the time you add up your deductibles, your copays, and what the expense is, you may find that it's not an expensive option relative to the other choices that are available to you. So, again, going to pause real quick and just check for questions. What's on your mind? Happy to answer anything about substance use disorder. Happy to answer anything about trauma recovery, mental health. What's on your mind? Would love to hear from you. Okay. Looks like folks are fairly quiet today. That's okay. Just reflecting on other things that I get to do with coaching. A lot of the folks that I serve are actually professionals working in this field who need someone with a lot of professional experience or a lot of personal experience in the areas in which they're struggling. So quite often, my being a coach is actually being a therapist to therapists or to psychiatrists and psychologists, to medical doctors, to folks who are struggling in some part of their career and need someone who's had success there. Sometimes I get to do coaching work with folks who are beginning their own business in a field that's similar to mine. I was very fortunate. I opened my clinic in 2009. It's grown exponentially, and not only has the growth been consistent, but actually the rate at which we've grown has increased year over year. I'm very, very fortunate to hire and employ incredibly talented people, and many of them work as coaches as well. It's really just a matter of comfort level and self-promotion. My experience is that folks who work in the healing and helping professions tend to be very uncomfortable with self-promotion, and so that means that we struggle to find them or to learn about their particular successes and expertise. So I think The thing that I most want to challenge you with today is to examine your own recovery process, to examine where you're at this point. Uh, I think a lot of us have a tendency to work real hard for a while, and metaphorically, we reach this plateau. For some reason, coaching and therapy always get compared to mountain climbing. So you climb this mountain, you reach higher and higher levels, you experience more and more success. And one of the things that we often encourage folks to safeguard against is becoming complacent. We've worked hard, we achieve new victories, we get to a better place than we've ever been, and then we get a little too comfortable. And if we become complacent, then we've arrested any ongoing growth. And so I always want to encourage folks and challenge them and say, look, what are your current goals? What are you working towards? And if that's not something that can be defined pretty specifically, then there's an excellent chance that they've become complacent or they've become distracted by some other part of their life. I joke with my clients that I'm a hedonist. I always want more. I'm never completely satisfied. I'm grateful. I am very, very blessed to have the life that I have. But I still want more, and I never want to stop growing. I never want to stop healing. I always want to be a work in progress, and I keep that humility because it serves me well. It gives me more opportunities to learn and heal and grow. It gives me more experiences and more connection to pretty amazing people that are doing great things. So my hope is that you want more for yourself. My hope is that you never become complacent. And if you have become complacent, then take a step back and let's get some outside input. Let's get some challenges from friends or family or people who really know you. What are the areas that you could be working on? What is the dream that you have? Sometimes people can tell me their goals, but they can't tell me about any dreams. And to me, a dream is just a goal that you don't know if you can achieve it. Like it'd be really cool and it would be deeply satisfying. But sometimes we just don't allow ourselves to have that kind of hope and face that kind of fear or potential disappointment. Adam, thank you again for your next question. Is there a need for life coaching? There is, and that comes in a lot of different forms. So for some folks, it's relational coaching. Folks who are struggling with their partnerships or their marriages. Folks like us typically did not grow up in healthy families, and so quite often everything that we've learned about how to be a partner and how to be a parent was learned in a family of origin that didn't contain healthy relationships. So sometimes I get to work with folks about what does it take to have a really great partnership that's fulfilling and involves intimacy. So those are just a handful of thoughts on coaching. There's potentially limitless ways in which it can be used, and I would really encourage you to connect with me. I know some excellent coaches who have availability for recovery coaching, life coaching, and executive coaching. I always want to connect with you about questions you have and topics that you'd like to see covered in the future. Jim@sobernow.com is the easiest way to connect with me. Would love for you to head over to YouTube real quick and check out Sober Now's YouTube channel. Over 100 videos there now on different topics of addiction recovery and mental health. 100% free. If you click on that subscribe button, you'll get a notification about once a week, sometimes twice. We're always generating new content and love connecting with you and yours. So I hope that in these trying times that you're taking excellent care of yourself. I hope you'll consider coaching, but more than anything, I hope you'll ask yourself, what's next for me? What are my next set of goals? What are the next things that I'm going to be working towards? What type of support am I going to allow myself to have with that professionally, but also really personally? Honestly, the longer I work with people, the more I see a need for new friends and meaningful support and just keeping it really simple about what it is that we need and asking for it. So I hope that you'll be doing those things for yourself. I thank you for spending some time with me today. If you would, give a quick like on this video and share with friends and family so we can expand this conversation. Take care of yourself. I'll be back next Thursday at noontime and look forward to talking to you then.